Why should you consider buying a tennis stringing machine? And equally, why should you not buy one? Let's start on that first point first, which is to say, why should you not bother buying one of these? And the simple answer is that unless you really care just about learning about the craft of stringing a tennis racket and you want to just learn that no matter the cost, the simple fact is that there is an outlay for this. And economically, unless you are going to be stringing your racket at least once a month, then probably the economies of scale says you don't necessarily need to buy one of these. And to be honest, if you're not stringing your racket at least once a month, you probably also don't care about the absolute sort of quality and perfection in your strings, or it suggests you're just not playing that much. So let's reverse that around and say, who should consider buying a stringing machine? And we're going to explore this in a bit of detail in terms of the numbers. But I would say there are four main reasons why you would consider buying a tennis stringing machine. The first one is economical. It comes down to money. Quite simply, there does become a point, and we're going to explore this, as to it becomes cheaper to buy a stringing machine and your own string compared to sending your rackets off to a stringer. There does become a point where actually it makes more sense to string it yourself, and we'll go through the numbers in a minute. The second one is convenience. Unless you have a stringer who can turn your rackets around in the time frame you need. For instance, you broke a string today, you're playing a tournament tomorrow, will your stringer string it overnight? You've got the convenience of being able to just go home, string your racket, 20-25 minutes later your racket's done. You've got that convenience for having the racket strung when you want. The third one is quality. And now this isn't to say that as a home stringer you're going to be able to string at the same or higher quality as a stringer who does it all the time. What it does mean is that you can be assured of the quality of the string job because you did it yourself. Okay? Now, I've got some videos posted to anybody who straight away thinks, wow, I'd never be able to do a good job. If you click the link in the corner there, I've got videos out for how to string a tennis racket, and there are some tips in there for how you can assure the quality of the job. Equally, and this might be a bit contentious, while there are lots of really great stringers out there, there are also people who will cut corners. So for example, do they tension every string individually, or do they pull two at a time? Do they really care when you say that you want it at 52 pounds? Do they kind of think, well, this person has no idea what 52 pounds is and they just string all their rackets at 55 or whatever? Do they just see someone who doesn't actually know stuff about strings and they just stick some cheap poly and say, you won't know the difference, and they charge you still a premium rate for it? There will be people out there who will kind of not do the best job, even though there are lots of great stringers out there. The point is, if you do it yourself, you know the string that went into it, you know the quality of the job based on what you do, and if you're happy with that, that's all fine. The fourth reason is being able to experiment. So because actually, and we'll go through the numbers, it's cheaper to buy a tennis stringing machine and buy strings, particularly if you're stringing a couple of times a month or more, you can actually start experimenting. So try different tensions, try different strings, try different string combinations, switch the combinations around. If you're doing hybrid, put your main strings in the crosses and your cross strings in the mains, and you actually get to play around a lot, and actually it still works out cheaper than if you were taking your racket to a stringer. You can actually sort of go through and experiment a lot with strings. And considering that probably the one thing people don't talk about enough of is that considering the only thing touching the ball, unless you're shanking a ball, is your strings, they are the most important thing. Aside from your racket and your technique and your fitness, the strings are incredibly important, and yet most people actually, considering how many strings are out there, how many different gauges of strings, how many different combinations, how many different tensions, people just really don't experiment with strings, but they can make a massive difference to your game, especially based on what you want to get out of it. So I think the simple things are, if you're wanting to make it economical, make sure you get a high quality job each time based on your definition of quality. You want to be able to experiment, but also because you are a player who probably is going to be stringing 2 or 3 times a month or more, and you want to have the convenience of doing it for yourself, then it certainly makes sense to look into buying a string machine. But let's consider the practicalities of that. How much does a stringing machine cost? Now, brand new, a drop weight or a crank machine, which are kind of probably what you're going to look at getting, you're probably looking at 450 to 500 pounds brand new. If you're looking at an electronic machine, probably 1,500 pounds up to 4, 5, 6,000 pounds for the top end models. You should be fine starting with a low end drop weight machine or a hand crank, and to be honest, second hand machines are just fine. There's very limited parts that move on this. So while you do get things like the clamps can loosen off, you can tighten them up. While things like the turntable can get a bit loose, you can tighten it up. It's minimal maintenance to be able to look after these machines. To give a good example, this machine I bought with the stand for £180. And the fantastic thing is, I would imagine that if I were to stop playing tennis and stop stringing, I could probably sell it for more than £180. Simple, they don't really lose their value. And actually, if you try and find one, you'll see that they go quite quickly. If we look on eBay just quickly, we can see there's an example here, which is listed for just under £200. And that actually looks in really nice condition. If you got that for $250, you'd be pretty happy with that. Okay, so let's explore the numbers. Economically, how many tennis racket restrings do you have to do with your own stringing machine so that you break even? To give you an idea of to say, should I bother doing this? Let's just take 2 very common strings. Babolat RPM Blast, which is a poly, and Babolat XL. Now, if you go to a local stringer in the UK, you should be able to get this done for around £25. Maybe a pound or two here or there, but probably around £25 you're going to get that done for a string job. If you were to buy 2 reels of string, and a reel contains generally about 200 meters of string, where even if you're not measuring that carefully, each of those reels should give you 33 half sets, so either a main or a cross. You should be able to get 33 restrings out of a reel. Now for Babolat XL in the UK, you can pick up a reel of that for around £160. Okay? For the RPM Blast, you can pick up a reel for about £125. So for each restring, for the XL, you're looking at about £4.85 per restring, and that's for a half set, so a main or a cross. For the RPM Blast, you're looking at about £3.79 for a half set. So for a total set for a racket, for the mains and the crosses, if you're doing a hybrid, you're looking at £8.64 for the strings. And that's just buying off the shelf. That's not buying trade. That's just what you can get if you go and search a retail store for buying a reel of string. So if we compare that to if you're paying a string of £25 and it's costing you £8.64, then straight away if you string your own racket, you're saving £16.36 on every restring. Okay? So the simple fact is that you're saving quite a lot of money just because you're only buying the strings. About sort of 60-70% plus of the cost you're giving to a stringer goes for manual labor, especially considering that they buy strings at trade with greater discounts. So you're saving over £16 on a restring. Okay? Now, if we take the cost of a string machine, if you can pick one of these up for £250, if we divide £250 by that £16.36 that you're saving, once you get onto your 16th restring, then you have broken even. You've basically, in the savings you've made from giving your racket to a stringer, you have basically paid back the investment from the savings you have. So that's 16 restrings. Bear in mind as well, if you then had to, you could sell the stringer and you'd get your £250 back. Even if you end up getting £200, that's still, it's all upside for you. So just natural illustration that you don't even need to be stringing every week. You could be stringing once every 2 weeks. And bear in mind, if you're even considering this, it probably suggests you are playing a reasonable amount of tennis. So let's say you're playing 6 hours a week. After you play for 12 hours, arguably, those poly strings are going to start going dead. The crosses might be starting to lose tension if you're talking about a multi-filament. And therefore, there is an argument to say, if you're actually playing that much or more, you should actually be caring about your strings and the feel of your strings, and therefore if you're getting 12 to 15 hours and not breaking them, they've probably gone dead, they probably need replacing, therefore stringing every couple of weeks makes sense. So again, you can start to see, it starts to enable you to say, rather than going, oh, I'll keep these strings in for a few months because they haven't broken, because it cost me £25 to restring them, now you start saying, actually, I can restring my racket 3 times more frequently for the same amount of money, yeah? And what you can also do then is start saying, do you know what? I strung this time at maybe my mains, my poly at, I don't know, let's say £48, my crosses at 52. What happens if I change that to 46.50? What happens if I change that to 50.54, for example? You can start actually playing around with tensions. What if you replace the RPM blast with, let's say, Luxolon, for example, or go and buy another polystring? And you can all of a sudden, you can start doing research and finding different strings that you can play around with. And frankly, you've almost got 2 restrings to play around with. You can go and buy 2 different sets of strings or string with different tensions, and you can start to explore and suddenly find that just because a stringer recommended RPM blast to you in Excel, actually you find they're not the strings that work for you. But you kind of have to do this based on what the stringer recommends and what they have available, unless you're going to go and buy your own strings and give it to the stringer. So, long story short, why should you buy a stringing machine? Well, don't buy one if you're just not stringing that much. And if you're not stringing that much and you don't really sort of see any difference in your play by keeping strings in your racket for 3 to 6 months, don't bother buying one. If, however, you're breaking strings a lot, or you start to really feel like your strings aren't, they're going dead, you're playing with them too long, or you kind of think, you know what, wouldn't it be nice to have sort of that convenience, the assurance of quality, the economy in terms of how much you're paying, but also you get that sort of ability to play around with different strings. You can start to see 100% this is not, while there is a bit of outlay of course, you very quickly recoup your savings, and it will make a massive difference to your tennis when you do explore and find those strings that work perfectly for you. So hopefully that's of use. Feel free to put any comments, but also do check out our how to string guides. The videos are super simple to follow and they'll get you stringing in no time if you do choose to make the investment.